Hello everybody and welcome back to another brand new Doctor Who video where we're continuing my look back on series 2 of Doctor Who, 15 years on from when each episode aired, and of course today marks exactly 15 years to the day since the episode Tooth and Claw aired. So let's have a little look back at it. So yeah, as I say, 15 years ago today we got the second episode of Series 2, and after the kind of exciting season opener, I guess you'd say, I mean, obviously I talked about it in last week and it was kind of an okay, solid season opener, but nothing, the most amazing thing in the world. It's another script written by RTD to start to sort of keep the series going from the off. Something quite different from what we'd seen in episode 1, where we go to the past, we go and meet Queen Victoria, sort of a classic Doctor Who historical figure story, basically, and continuing the trends that we'd see throughout the first 4 series of Doctor Who in the RTD era, of having in the first 3 episodes an episode set in the past, the present and the future. Of course, we had the future last time, we've got the past this time, and then we go to the present for school reunion in next week's episode. So covering off all bases right from the beginning of the series. Now, in terms of looking at this as a story, I'd say that kind of my thoughts over the years of this story have always been just kind of average. Like, it's nothing special as a Doctor Who story. It's there's nothing wrong with it particularly. It's just not that great. It's just kind of bog standard, mid-series. I know we're only early in the series, but kind of those middling episodes of Doctor Who where you can watch them and they can be reasonably enjoyable. But I struggle to believe this is going to be anybody's favourite story ever, or really that anybody really thinks that highly of it, because it is just fairly standard Doctor Who in many ways, and some aspects that I'd say that aren't that Doctor Who-y. Now, it's got some very clear classic Doctor Who-y tropes for a historical. You've got the historical figure of Queen Victoria, played by Pauline Collins, of course, who some people may remember she played a character in The Faceless Ones back in 1967 with Patrick Troughton's Doctor, and nearly became the next companion all the way back then, in place, what would have been in place of Victoria. But ultimately she decided against wanting to take on the role of the full companion, and therefore only appeared in The Faceless Ones. But she finally gets her second Doctor Who appearance almost, well, that's, 40 years later or so, near enough, which is just quite a cool sort of link back to the past. And I think she does a reasonable job of playing Queen Victoria's character in this story. Like, I don't think it's, like the greatest portrayal of Queen Victoria you're going to see, but then in a quick 45-minute episode of Doctor Who, you've got to have a slightly caricatured version of a historical figure to really get across and get the audience to buy into it. So I think that's sort of noticed at points in this story, but it's hardly a big detracting factor. One of the other big sort of Doctor Who tropes you've got is just full of people running up and down corridors. It's like, it's got that classic, like, people trapped underground, then we're running down corridors, then we get locked into a building to stay away from the enemy, the alien or whatever. Like, there's a lot of classic, just generic tropes of Doctor Who in there, which means it's hardly a groundbreaking episode in any ways. It's very much just solid Doctor Who. I think the werewolf idea, like, I don't hate it, but I don't know how Doctor Who-y it necessarily is. Of course, they try to play off the kind of alien aspect of it, and, that there's some alien sort of influence behind the werewolf to kind of make it more sci-fi Doctor Who-y. But kind of like as not that bad as the werewolf does look. I think the CGI genuinely is actually all right, particularly if we think that this was 2006. I really don't think you can say too much bad about it. But I just don't know how much it kind of fitted with Doctor Who, I feel like, to an extent. And I think ultimately the story just ends up being remembered as the story with the werewolf in, and not much more. Though this story did very much almost feel like sort of horror in elements of this story. Of course, the werewolf story sort of idea kind of plays into that. But just some of the very kind of creepy moments where the werewolf is being transformed from the human to the werewolf, that's tremendously sort of creepy and quite scary. And I think some of the scariest stuff they've done in Doctor Who up until this point, really. I know we'd had like the gas mask zombies of the previous series, which were very, very creepy, but that kind of seeing that visual change of a human into a werewolf, I thought, particularly for a younger audience, would have been very, very scary. And then just the way that the sort of werewolf goes around devouring people in the quite sort of graphic way of doing that, and sometimes just using sound effects and things, but it just feels very kind of creepy and scary and quite sort of grown up, I think, in many ways. And so I would have been 8 years old when I first watched this story, and I can't remember it, not gonna lie, I can't remember watching it as an 8-year-old, but I'm almost like, feel like with my parents really wanted me to watch this episode, like where they've covered my eyes in parts of it, because it is very creepy and almost feels borderline for a child as young as that maybe to watch, I think. This episode does feel like very much a continuation of the sort of closer and closer relationship of the Doctor and Rose. We stop at the beginning of this episode with them playing some sort of, rocky pop music and the Doctor singing along and them falling on the floor and laughing with each other. And you can just sense that real chemistry, that real closeness close connection, and then having the running gag about trying to get Queen Victoria to say you're not amused, and just the kind of jokey aspects between the two of them just kind of remind you of that kind of, you know, unspoken love really that's already building up at this point, and of course comes to a head at the end of the series. But yeah, you can just see that very clearly woven into this story, which I don't think is of any sort of detracting factor of the story at all. I think it just continues to build that closeness and that relationship throughout the episode. Of course, this story does also set up and establish more of Torchwood. We get some of the first references to Torchwood. I know we got a reference in Bad Wolf, the episode Bad Wolf of Series 1, when Rose is on the weakest link, but this is kind of the first more clear hint at Torchwood becoming a thing. Of course, the building that this whole story is set in is Torchwood House, and which obviously then at the end of the story, Queen Victoria decides to turn into the Torchwood Institute, setting up an institute to fight aliens basically, and, you know, keep an eye on the Doctor and get him in trouble if he ever comes back to Earth because he's been exiled, and all of that. And I thought it was notable that kind of it happened right at the very end of the story. It felt like when the Doctor and Rose are dropped off by the guy with the whole sort of, you know, dropping them off by the TARDIS, and they walk over to the TARDIS, chucking away about how the whole royal family are werewolves and all that, and getting in the TARDIS and the TARDIS just dematerializing. Like in 9 out of 10 Doctor Who stories, that is the final shot of the episode, and there we go, next time. But no, they decided to add an additional scene after what felt like the ending, really, to basically set up and establish Torchwood and the Torchwood Institute, and kind of going, this is going to be an important thing, you should remember the Torchwood Institute, and that the Doctor's going to get in trouble if he ever comes across them again. It just felt like that was being very obviously set up to come up later in the series. I'm not 100% sure if at this point we were that aware of Torchwood and what was going to be happening with it. I'm pretty sure Torchwood the TV show would have been announced by this point, given that this would have aired 8-9 months before it started, before Torchwood started airing on TV, so I think they would have been known by this point. But whether we quite understood the extent of its involvement in the finale, I'm not sure. And so I think it's interesting to look out for those little references and things like that. But certainly this felt like the moment where Torchwood was being made a big thing, going, you audience, you need to remember this because it's going to be important later on. I feel like fundamentally this is one of those Doctor Who stories where there isn't really a whole lot to actually say about it. There's some very odd scenes, like the scene at the very beginning with the monk sort of fight scene that they decided to use to start the episode feels so unlike Doctor Who. It was very surreal and a weird feeling watching it, I have to say, being thrown straight into it. And suddenly we've got these monks jumping around. I mean, I know there was comments at the time that the monks in the red outfits looked like a BBC continuity little ident at the start of TV programs, which is just quite funny and entertaining, I thought. But it just feels quite unlike Doctor Who in many ways, because I don't know, it just had that wrong vibe. It just doesn't feel like that sort of levels of violence and attacking and throwing people around and stuff was very in line with what we often see in Doctor Who. Maybe that's completely a terrible take on it, but I don't know, it just threw me off a little bit, and it felt like once we got the Doctor and Rose on screen, it felt more like Doctor Who again, and introduced Queen Victoria and realised what the story was kind of going to be about. But just in that opening sequence, it felt a little bit weird and a little bit less Doctor Who-y, I think. And so it feels like at this point, Series 2's had a solid start to it. It certainly hasn't had a classic episode by any stretch of the imagination, and I know over the next few episodes, well, I think we would say that things improve from these first two, where New Earth is just your very sort of standard comedic opener, and then this is it's bog standard Doctor Who. It's a historical episode with a famous historical figure, and, you know, werewolves. That's kind of all you need to remember about this story. It's I guess it's worth looking back on, and certainly in a marathon I would never like skip it or anything, but it's just not the sort of story that I'm going to go back to very often. So yeah, that was Tooth and Claw, 15 years on from when it aired. Guys, do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you can remember it from when you watched it at the time, let me know what you thought of it at the time, but if not, of course, just let me know your thoughts on it now, or more recently, your general perspectives on whether this is actually kind of just bog standard Doctor Who, whether it's actually one of your favourite stories. If it is, I'd love to hear why, because it just isn't really for me. But yeah, please do let me know those thoughts down in the comments below. But apart from that, guys, I'll be back in very soon for a brand new video, of course. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.